welcome to the December 26th podcast. How are you?
I am excellent. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Really excited to talk to you, particularly about your Caribbean roots, because that's point of commonality, but also your career journey, which I find pretty intriguing considering how you've elevated in your profession as well. So looking forward to getting into those things. And plus, I'm just loving the black sweater you've got going on with this backdrop here. It really, really works.
You got to keep it simple. It's cold. I live in my basement, so I have to like wear things to keep me warm. But I have to like have things that sort of give it a pop. Living in the basement can be kind of gloomy, so I have like art all over the place to keep it lively.
Listen, I have learned now as a homeowner, especially a homeowner of an older home, that the heat is not the same in various places of the house.
It's
Depending on where
not.
you are, it is not evenly distributed. These older homes, they have great character, but it's not a game when it comes to that air distribution for sure.
Yeah, especially when you're underground, like all the
Right.
cold air comes down here. So
Exactly. So we can talk about real estate and all that great stuff offline. But let's get into it. Tell me, who is Tarik McDermott?
who is Tarik? That's such a loaded question. I'm a hustler. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a legacy builder. I'm a political activist, humanitarian. I'm a myriad of things. I'm also like the rose that grew from the concrete in Harlem, where I was born and raised. But ultimately, I think I'm just a humble guy that started out, and I'm trying to finish on top and make a positive impact on the world on my journey. I think Maya Angelou said it best. She said, my mission in life is not merely to survive, but to thrive and do some with some compassion, some humor, and some style. And that's pretty much how I live my life.
And I tend to believe that folks who are diligent and intentional about legacy building, that often is driven by their own experiences, be it negative or positive, that informs why things like wealth generation, legacy building, activism are important to us. So with that being said, tell me a bit about your origin story.
Ooh, so born and raised in Harlem, single parent. My grandmom was very involved in my life. Harlem is a very special and different place. Very lively, filled with culture and spirit. Always something going on, parties, events, basketball games during the summer was a thing. In Harlem, everyone is about self-expression, and everyone put their best outfit on because everywhere you go, you're gonna see someone. There's always a crowd of people around, so you want to make sure you present your best self. So always a lot of fun, but at the same time, it's a dangerous place as well, right? You have a lot of gun violence, still to this day. So you can expect to like have a great time, but you got to kind of watch over your shoulder because there's always rivalries between neighborhoods going on, and five or six people getting shot and killed, during the summertime or when things are kind of going on. So I had my fair share of positive and negative experiences in Harlem. But at the same time, for me personally, education was priority number one in my household. As I mentioned, my mom was a single parent, and she worked extremely hard to make sure I got the best education. I went to private school pretty much all my life, middle school and high school. And then I was fortunate enough to go to Hampton. But my mom always said, I work two jobs to put you through school. You're going to get a good education so you can do well for yourself and take care of your family. So, that was kind of my balance growing up, like hanging out and partying and, living on the edge a little bit, so to speak, coming up in Harlem. But then at the same time, I was that same kid that always had the uniform on and a book bag full of books. And, I was always about getting good grades and stuff like that. So, I was kind of tethering between those two lifestyles. And then I went off to Hampton, graduated from Hampton, which also had a really, really big impact on my life, right? Like that's a culture shock. It's like on the borderline of, the southern part of America. And it's very different from Harlem. Very, very different. And, being in Hampton, you get to see like an abundance of Black excellence, right? And, people that come from generations of college graduates, and some families even have a lot of wealth. and that is a very different experience from Harlem. But you don't really recognize that while you're in it, because you only know what you see. But then when you see all these affluent families, you're like, wow, like there are people out here that really come from wealth and education and stuff like that. So all those things kind of shaped me for who I am as a man now.
And it's funny to me. I think growing up, having that mom who worked multiple jobs and put you through private school, it felt like an experience that was unique to my story. And now that we've been doing the show, you realize how many single parents made the sacrifice to give their kids the best shot possible at college admission, at a career. And when you're in it as a child, I think, you don't have as deep of an appreciation for the level of sacrifice and energy it takes to make that happen. But that experience, at what you were describing, I've had that exact experience of like all the books. These kids don't know. They got their
Yeah.
Chromebooks now. They don't know the struggle, right, of having homework in every subject and having to bring all those textbooks home. But for where I grew up, different experience than you walking through a Harlem neighborhood in a uniform with a backpack full of books. So did you feel like an oddity? Was there a discomfort there, with living this life in private school, but then also coming home to your community?
Oh, that brings back so many memories. I had a lot of friends that were from the neighborhood, and they would make fun of me all the time. They still make fun of me. When I come home from work in the summertime, and I'm like coming from the train, and everyone's outside, and I have on my suit. People, oh, look at tight pants and stuff like that. But it was, there were jokes out of love. But yeah, I did feel like an oddity or rarity, so to speak, because a lot of people didn't have those opportunities. So I was like, one of the only kids that, was always in private school or would always kind of walk through the block in a suit or like with a book bag full of books. So, it was an eye opening thing. And, people made jokes out of love, but, you can tell like people wanted to have those opportunities as well. So, yeah, that question definitely brings back a lot of memories.
And you mentioned this exposure to positivity, but also exposure to negativity as well. And when you're talking about the time that you were growing up in, also lots of things happening, lots of criminal activity,
Yeah.
and not just on the side that we know and we've seen on the news, the killings, all those things, territory battles, but like all kinds of other crime that may not be as well known,
Yeah.
and readily apparent. But for you, how did you really combat that pressure and that pull, while being exposed to things that are very different than the world you're living in academically and maybe in your household?
It was tough, because when you are choosing to go the positive route, in Harlem, especially at that age, like certain things are important to you, right? Like you want to have nice clothes and you want to be able to step out and sort of keep up with the Joneses and things like that. But when you are on a straight path and your parents don't really have the resources to provide those things for you, and then you see people kind of doing things on the side or like involved in activity that would sort of uh, put a risk to their freedom. And they, making fast money and they have all the jewelry and cars and stuff. And, these are my friends. Like, I grew up on 115th and Lenox. So, these are my actual friends. These are not just people I see walking by. So, it's very tempting to be like, let me just jump in, for this one time and then I'll jump out. But I think what kept me on track was just knowing there was light at the end of the tunnel, right? Like I knew that my journey was going to be a lot longer than some people. But I knew if I stood focused that I would come out on top. And now it's one of those things that's coming full circle because now I can start to see that road behind me and thankful that I stayed on the right path because now I'm able to sort of, you know, live the life that I want to and I'm free. I have my freedom. And some of my friends, they didn't make it and they're, got caught up in street life and went to prison or some of them even got killed. So, I'm just thankful I stood on the right path.
Right. And, shout out to the strong Black women who have raised strong Black men, especially across generations, mother and grandmother coming together to rear children, but not having that male presence in the home, did you feel the absence of your father, or were you getting guidance and mentorship and that void filled in some other way?
Yes to both. So I definitely miss the absence of my father. I'd hear stories about him all the time, like, oh, you dress just like your dad, and you act just like your dad, but I didn't know him, so I had no recollection or no memory of him as an adult. It was only until recently that I was able to visit him, maybe a few years ago. So, I definitely missed or always wondered like what he was like. But fortunately enough for me, I had a lot of other, positive male figures in my life. When I growing up in Harlem, there's a rec center down the street called Millbank. And there were men there that sort of took me under the wing and mentored me and stuff like that. So I always had positive male figures in my life, but those people are not flesh and blood. Although they are extremely well intentioned, it's just not the same as having like your actual dad.
So, you have this experience of having positive male influence outside the home, even though, and hearing stories about your father, even though he's not there, and also having this academic experience of being exposed to the next level of education via private school. Did you have a view very early of what you aspired to be?
Yes. And it was very broad strokes, right? Like, I didn't come from, a legacy of college graduates. And so I didn't have a lot of exposure to like what was out there in terms of career paths and stuff like that. Only what I saw on TV, but you don't really have an understanding of those things. But I knew, around high school that I wanted to be involved in business, right? Just because, I always wanted to be that guy that was a leader or out in front and making decisions. And, those are things I kind of learned growing up in Harlem, right? They had like the kid groups, everyone had their little crew back in the day. And, I always was the one that wanted to be the CEO, even though I didn't know what that meant back then. But I knew that that was the person that was in charge, that was the leader. And I was good at organizing things and calling meetings. And those things I learned like before I understood what business was. So, once I started to get exposure to these different programs, and Millbank, the rec center I mentioned, they had these different avenues where you could, sort of go and shadow people in the workplace. And I knew from day one of that program when I walked in, I think it was in Sony. People had them in nice suits and the office was nice. And I knew from then, like, this is my path. Like, I need to be a business person. And then I kind of figured out, like, down the line that I wanted to be on the legal side of business. And fortunately, that worked out for me.
So you get to Hampton. So we're stepping back a little bit. Where you get to Hampton, you've got this hardworking family that has helped you get there, but now you're seeing Black wealth, and Black wealth that has been gained through careers, and passed down through generations, in a way that may be different than Black wealth and opulence that you may have seen in New York. Did you feel a sense of comparison or inadequacy in any way, now realizing that, wow, there are Black people who live like this and who grew up with both parents and who have all the resources in the world, and the path is set for them when they walk out of here? Did you feel that difference, or stark contrast in comparison to your story?
Absolutely. And almost instantly, right? Because, when you come from New York, especially at that age, you kind of have this chip on your shoulder that, we're the best, we're the coolest, we have the most swag and things like that. In my opinion, to a certain degree, that's even true, right? So,
Agreed.
um, but it's one thing to have all the nice clothes and to be a slick talker and have charisma and things like that. But then when you start to have conversations with people that come from these families and have infinite resources and not even financial, I mean, like just the networks they have access to, it's like, well, wow, I don't know anyone that is the CEO of XYZ or is, the director of this. Um, and so, when you start to have those conversations, you realize that, having nice clothes and things like that is nice, but people really have extensive resources beyond like what we could even have imagined coming from Harlem. So, Indeed, I felt a difference instantly.
But I'm sure, you had such a laser-like focus on knowing what you wanted to do. There was that drive there as well. Like, I'm here. There's access from an academic perspective and from additional support opportunities, as well as internship and job opportunities as well. I'm sure you had that exposure also. So in terms of like the next step in your academic and professional journey to get on the path that you wanted to get on as far as career, did that crystallize very early? Like, were you a person who's like, I'm going to get this internship, I'm going to do that, and I'm going to make these moves to make sure that I'm set up by the time I graduate from here?
No, absolutely not. um, so while I had exposure to internships and things of that nature, they didn't sort of evolve or turn into opportunities right away. Um, I graduated from Hampton, and that summer I spent without a job. And then that fall, I ended up, working as a math tutor, making basically like $150 a week. And I did that for about a year. And that was like one of the most depressing times in my life, right? Like, I am a first generation, graduate, and I come home with this big fancy $90,000 piece of paper, and I can't even get a job. And then the first job I get is a tutor, and I'm making $150 a week. I could barely afford to get on the train and buy myself a pair of sneakers to help my mom with the bill or two. So that was a very depressing time, but it was motivating because I knew that that was not the end of the road for me. Right, I had come too far, worked too hard. So I kept pushing. And a friend of mine, he was working retail doing security for a while, and he's like, "Man, just come get your 8-hour license, your 16-hour license, and do security." And I was like, why not? That was paying more than what I was making. So, I did it. And even then, I was standing in front of the door, like, checking people's bags as they walk in and out. And I'm just like, man, I have to keep going, And another friend of mine from Hampton, and this is where my network starts to work for me a little bit. His mom worked at HR in Time Warner Cable, and she's like, I can get you a job at the call center. And I'm like, let's do it. It's a progression. It's a step in the right direction. So, I did that, and I wore a suit to work at the call center because I could see the opportunity, right? Like, it was connected to the corporate center, and I was
Hmm.
like, that's where I need to be. And so I used to wear a suit to work, and people used to be like, "Why are you in a suit? You don't have to dress up to work at a call center." And in the back of my mind, I'm like, someone's gonna notice me, and I'm gonna have a conversation with them, and they're gonna see that I can, do what they do on the corporate side. And of course, that never happened. um, but while I was at Time Warner Cable, I got wind of an opportunity to work at JP Morgan on this temporary project. They were trying to reconcile the mortgage crisis. They screwed up the loan servicing, and they had a ton of records to go through. So they hired a bunch of people temporarily to work on that. And I got in and I did extremely well because now I'm like, okay, I'm here now. I have to work. And I did my thing, and I was one of the top analysts on the project. And I found a mentor, Italian guy. His name is Guy. I'll never forget it. It was so cool, so cool. And he was like, "Man, you at the end of this project, you can either go back to Time Warner, or you can go to Delaware to work at the investment bank." And I looked at him. I said, "Are you kidding me? Like, you just said investment bank. I don't care where it is. I'm going." And that's what I did. I went down to Delaware, worked in Delaware for 2 years. Again, outperformed, and I was able to come back to New York. And then, I've been on an upward trajectory since then, career wise.
So I think what is doubly hard for a lot of folks, particularly Black people, is we've been told, go to school, get your degree, get a good job, and everything's going to be great. And it doesn't always pan out that way in a straight line. It can happen, but because the network is not there, particularly if you're coming out of school in a weird time. And I think you were coming out post Great Recession, so the economy is still trying to find its footing again. Um, it can, even though there's so many circumstances outside of your control, it can have a psychological effect Not just from a perspective like I'm broke, but also from the perspective I did what I was supposed to do, and this tree is not yielding fruit. And when you go to a school that's known for legacy and people who come from generational wealth, you may have classmates and friends who are not having the same experience because of their Rolodex. So how is that weighing on you, before these other opportunities? You're literally checking IDs and and bags when there may be somebody who graduated alongside of you who was able to leverage their Rolodex for the better.
It was embarrassing, honestly. I'm from Harlem. I have that. That's in my spirit. It's in my DNA, and I'm a proud person. So that was a really, really tough time in my life. But I just knew that I was gonna continue to work until I came out on top. So, while I was like, you know, staying away from all of the social events and catching up with people just because I just wasn't in the place I wanted to be. Obviously, I had tons of friends that were, working these big jobs, because they could make a phone call that would grant them that opportunity. And I didn't have that same resource. So I kind of stood to myself um, for a while. And then, thankfully now I'm sort of out of that space. But, I just stayed away from people and stood to myself, and I kept my head down and just kept working. It was a tough time, but sometimes you have to just, put your big boy shoes on and keep walking down that journey, and that's what I did.
So you go through all these steps that have, nothing, math tutor, security, customer service, nothing to do with what you went to school for. But it's a big leap to go from that and then get into iBanking with JP Morgan. So you spend these 2 years in Delaware, and then you come back north, right? And then what did the next chapter of your career look like?
So I was in the investment bank in New York, and now I'm starting to catch up with people again, right? Because now I have this job, and I kind of feel like I can stand shoulder to shoulder with people. That's a separate issue in itself, but I'm starting to have these conversations, and I'm realizing that I am being underpaid. Like I can, do much better than I'm doing because I started out so low. So now I'm seeking other opportunities, and I go to a consulting firm because when you make the jump from a large institution to a smaller one, generally you get the big pay bump because you're sort of working in a system that's a lot smaller, so it's more difficult and stuff like that. So they have to pay you more. So I worked at a consulting firm that specializes in providing experts to people that are seeking investment opportunities, right? So like if I'm an investment analyst at JP Morgan and I'm researching products at Apple to invest in a company ultimately, but I don't know anything about the space, I'll call that company to sort of connect with an expert so I can learn and get smart about it. So I did that for about 2 years, and um, unbeknownst to me, that experience coupled with my JP Morgan experience was the perfect formula to go to the buy side, which is like the sexier side of investment banking. So I get this call from this recruiter. I updated my LinkedIn, and she saw my LinkedIn. She's like, "Have you ever thought about going to the buy side?" And I'm like, "Me?" Like I had no intention of taking that direction because I know it's impossible to get into those firms, and two, get in as a black person, honestly. And when she told me about the role, I was like, of course, like so she schedules the interview for a week out, and I'm like, I need time to prep. So put this thing out as far as you can. And every night I would just go over my resume. I read as much as I could. I watched movies. I did everything to make sure that I was prepared for that interview. And, I did a good job. The hiring manager loved me, wanted me to start, the next week or so. So when I got in there, I was like, wow, like my life is different now. Like I've made basically like a 40 to $60,000 jump from my old job, and now I have like a different trajectory now, right? So I did that for 5 years, but that is a very, very different world. Very, very different world. It's super privileged. Like these are, children that come from long legacies of people that graduated from Harvard and Yale. So like I'm trying to socialize with these people. And again, like I'm from Harlem. So there is a huge disconnect, right? Like we don't communicate the same, right? We're not interested in the same thing. So that was kind of tough for me. trying to fit in socially. But I kept my head down. I kept working. Um, but for some reason, I couldn't get promoted.
Mm,
I was working just as hard, and I had a colleague who we were like shoulder to shoulder. We were doing the same job. It was just split down the middle, and he got promoted twice. And that 5 years go by, and I'm still an associate, and he's now a manager, and everyone notices this at this point because like I've been with the firm 5 years. People sort of rely on me to carry like part of the compliance program, so people know that I'm doing a good job, but I'm not getting like the title or the bump that I'm supposed to. And this is recently. So, fast forward, I started looking for opportunities. I got a job that I'm currently in now as a VP with like my rightful place. um, and so, that's been my journey so far. And now I work for a multi-strategy, multi-billion-dollar investment advisor, and I'm vice president on legal and compliance team. So.
So, we all know the politics and bureaucracy that goes around career advancement in the corporate space, and finance and financial services, whole other beast. We could spend an hour just talking about that, right? And what you described happens a lot. And I've had these conversations both on the show and off the show. But when you're in it, right, you find a way to navigate and get over that hurdle if you're committed to the career. It's a shame that we have to do that, but it's true. But when you're in it, the psychological toll it can take when you're literally seeing somebody sitting to the right or to the left of you, which is exactly what happened to you, literally advancing. And you're like, the performance reviews are there, the executive sponsors are there, but it's just not happening for me. So how did you keep yourself grounded mentally and spiritually in the face of being essentially held back?
Wow, that's such a good question because I was a mess. Part of that story that I didn't tell was that they brought on a more junior person around my third year, and I trained her, and she got promoted before me. And when that happened, I lost it. That day when they announced the promotions, and I saw her name on the list and mine wasn't, I lost it. I had to I put my coat on and I had to leave because I was just like they just literally spit in my face. I trained this girl. How did she get, promoted before me? And I was a mess for a while. I started to underperform. I didn't care about the job. But then I just had talks with friends, and they're like, "Yo, just keep your head up, man. Like something's gonna happen for you." And then I started to see a therapist, and she really, really changed, my outlook on things. She just was like, you know, you have to keep performing for you. It's not about them. You're not in what you're doing is trying to overcome an obstacle. It's not about them. And once I changed my mind to sort of work in that framework, I started to perform again and I felt better about it. And then when it was time for me to leave, then that's when they're like, oh, we want to promote you. We want you to be a manager. You can work from home. We'll pay you X amount of dollars. And I'm like, really? Like you wait until now? But it was really heavy on my mental health. I knew more than anything that I was being underpaid because I should be two levels above where I am, and finance, especially in the buy side, that is a huge, huge, huge compensation difference. So it was heavy, but thankfully I am out of that space.
And shout out to a great therapist, because these environments are toxic. Let's just call them what they are. When you are trying to do everything right and you're doing the work and it's just not happening for you, and it's infuriating when you have to stand there and drink the champagne and clap and congratulate somebody who's managed to advance beyond you when they came in after you. And I think it's really important. It's a piece of advice that I try to give when I talk to folks who are just entering their career. Like, make sure you have a support system around you. Make sure you have a good therapist or a good coach, a career coach, or something that you can talk to, because when you get into these situations, and it happens to the best of us, um, it can push you so far in the other direction that exactly what you said happens. It's like you're now giving them ammunition to not advance your career because you're so burnt out and exhausted from all the things going on behind the scenes that you're not performing. And I think the only way to be successful, you can have all the talent in the world, but the only way to be successful in these environments is having the right support behind you.
Yeah. Yeah. And the funny part about that story is that woman, when she got promoted, they didn't pay her what she wanted to get. And thank God I was in a right state of mind at that time, and I was nice to her. And I continued to support her because she left. So it was kind of like a smack back to them. And coincidentally, she works at the firm that I'm at now.
Mm.
So my resume magically appears on her desk. And she's like, Tarik, I love Tarik. He trained me, he helped me get promoted. And she's like, hired him. This is a good guy. And I had no idea that she was like working for me behind the scenes. And, I skipped over like a lot of steps in the interview process just because I had her sort of championing for me in the background. So, it worked out for me in the long run that I was still, a nice person to her, and not let that sort of like affect our relationship. So it worked out for me in the end.
So, what does your role look like now?
Vice President, Legal and Compliance. This is a real estate, well, it's a multi-strategy investment advisory firm, but it's mostly focused on real estate. Um, Roughly $30 billion company. It's a huge deal, and it's sort of a startup. So we're charged with, well, my team in particular is charged with building out the compliance program around this really huge and complex investment company, which is a daunting task, right? There's a lot of tedious details to go over, but at the same time, my function is pretty much regulated by the government. So there's a lot of pressure to make sure things don't fall through the cracks. Um, and we're working under intense stress and scrutiny every single day, to not make any mistakes. As you know, in finance, like there's no room for error, right? Like, could you imagine waking up one day and checking your account and you know the money that you thought was there isn't there, right? Like that would cause an uproar. So like, there's literally no room for error, and you know I'm charged with making sure things go they're supposed to, and it's a big task when I'm coming from a firm that didn't think that I was capable of rising to that sort of occasion. So now I'm just stepping in, and it's trial by fire, and I'm doing pretty well so far.
And I would think that you're working with a lot of attorneys as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, and that's the funny thing too, right? Because I'm over a few attorneys, and I don't have a law degree, so there are challenges that come with that too, right? Like, there's this sort of chip on their shoulder, like, well, who's this guy? He doesn't, But thankfully, I have the experience to where I'm confident enough to stay in my role and have sort of some authority, because I know what I'm doing, degree or law degree or not. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this might be a controversial question. You can choose to answer it or not, considering that this is your current role. But do you think being in these types of positions where you have oversight and oversight of those with this advanced degree, do you think there's an added layer of complexity having this oversight and also being a Black man?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I feel like I've been in this type of environment for long enough to where I know how to navigate. And this goes back to the mentor I mentioned in the very beginning of my career. He told me, be assertive, but be reasonable. And when you're assertive and you sort of exercise that confidence and that strength, people know like not to play with you. So especially if your work, and you're diligent, and you are making sure you cross every T. It's really hard for people to try to play those kind of games with you, right? Like, so I've been fortunate enough to not experience anything major, but there are the little backhanded comments that might come every now and then, followed by like a joke. But it comes with the territory, and I'm fine with that.
So you've got this career path that completely makes sense. The steps that you've taken and how it's evolved, and is impressive the way that you've, because it does feel like sometimes you got to accelerate later because you had the slower start, and when things kind of click, and like you said, you can the stars align and you can skip some steps in the process on the interview, or this person knows you, you feel vindicated in a sense and like you're making up for lost time. And most people would just stay on that trajectory to C suite within whatever their chosen corporate field is. Then you have this whole other thing, which feels very much like out of left field, right? A health center.
Yes.
Tell me a bit about that.
Wow. So that has been a journey in itself. So during the pandemic, I was just sitting around and I'm thinking, like, I live in my property now, which is a multifamily. It's my first real estate investment. So, during the pandemic, I'm like, it's time for property number two. And I'm working with a realtor and looking at this building, like a commercial building that I wanted to buy, and I'm like, this doesn't feel right, right? This is boring. Like, I don't want to just buy another building and rent it out. Like, I want to, add something to it. And I was having conversations with my best friend. One of my best friends, his name is King. Met him at Hampton, and he's a an occupational therapist, and he's like, maybe we can do something, but this conversation doesn't evolve until later on. So Christmas comes around, and I'm like talking to my mom, and she has this friend that has a daycare. So now the wheels are turning. I'm like, wait a second, maybe I can put a daycare in this building, and I can get more creative around that. So I start having conversations with people, and I'm pulling resources, and the idea pops in my head to do an adult daycare. Because parallel to that, I'm experiencing things with my grandmother. She's, having, um, what do you call it? Like these sessions, like of dementia. She's showing signs of dementia. So now I'm like, man, I have to do something. And that idea kind of comes full circle because of what's happening in my personal life. So I'm like, let's do an adult daycare. To target, dementia patients, or, just elderly people that need something to do or need care during the day. So naturally, I go to my friend. He's in healthcare, so he's the first person I call. Like, let's get together, let's do something. And he has the bright idea to bring the therapy component into that business model. And I'm like, that's amazing idea, because those things kind of work together. But in the pandemic, it's tough because we can't get the necessary licenses that we need, because everything is shut down. And at this point, we have already like rented out of space, and we're talking to consultants, and the consultants to open the daycare is like thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, and we're like, that's not going to work because we can't open it to the public anytime soon, because of we're in the middle of the pandemic. So now we're just kind of shifting, focusing on therapy, and we're kind of mirroring a business model that he's familiar with. He's like, we need to do something bigger than just therapy. We need to be a one-stop shop. And now, like, there are other things that are sort of playing in the back of my head about socioeconomics and, building institutions for Black communities and things like that. And I'm like, you're right. We need to do like a full-scale health center. So now, we're on the path to have a one-stop shop, right? We have therapy, the therapy company, which provides physical, speech, and occupational therapy. And then we adding the physician component to it, where we'll have pain management, we'll have a podiatrist, an internal medicine doctor, and those components will sort of work together and serve as a one-stop shop for healthcare. Now, the city that we're in, East Orange, underserved community, low income predominantly, and there is nothing in sight that is decent. Like, there's no health center that is decent. So we're like, man, like, this is a really bad situation. Once we start to reach out to the community and have these conversations, they're like, if I want to get care from my son who, has autism, and I want to get him some therapy, I have to go, you know, 30, 40 minutes away. And, she's like, I don't have a car, or, this it's tough for me to do that. And, kids with autism, they need like a lot of support. So it's tough for them to get the care that they need because they have to travel so far. So, as we start to have these conversations, we like, man, we really have to get this done because there is a huge need for the services here. And, fast forward, here we are opening our doors to the community.
So I know you say here we are, fast forward, but I feel like there's a lot to unpack there when you think about the cost associated with like the insurance alone, right? So it seems like someone who's at your level professionally who's done really well, still seems like that would be a really heavy lift. So how were you able to go about this and invest the resources to actually pull it off?
Wow, great question. That was the most challenging aspect of this, right? Because this is uncharted territory, right? My friends in healthcare is a therapist, but the business side of healthcare is completely different. So this is new to all of us. And so, just getting the legal framework set up was an obstacle in itself because we have no idea what to do. And so, we're reaching out to people trying to gather resources, and then we start talking to consultants. And, we're paying people 2,500, 3,000, and this and that to have these conversations to get smart around what we need to do. And we're getting nowhere. People are taking advantage of us because they know we don't know anything, and, they can get paid just to tell us whatever they want. And they don't really know like how to do, because like our model is still like more complex than most other healthcare institutions. So we need like someone who's an expert to guide us through this journey, and people are just telling us whatever. So we wasting thousands of dollars on that. And just to take a step back, this is all self-funded. We're paying for this out of pocket, and at this point we have the space, so we're paying rent, fully renovated. Everything's brand new. I mean, the floor, the paint, the ceiling. We are adding things to make it look nice. We have to furnish the place, right? Then we have to get the healthcare equipment. We have this small little machine. I still don't know what it does because that is not my area. But this is a $6,000 machine, and it's like this big. So we have all those costs, and we're paying for this like out of pocket. Like when I get paid, I'm paying for, expenses that are coming up. And this is just like in the infrastructure stages. So we're building. We finally find a lawyer who's gracious enough to be honest with us and say, what you guys are trying to do is extremely difficult. It's rare, and it's going to cost a lot of money to do this. And, my business partner, there are three of us. We're all kind of built from the same cloth. We're like, we can do this. We're going to do it. And so, we're trudging forward, but, we're footing the bill. So, we get the infrastructure, the legal framework sort of set up. And now, we furnish the place, we get the equipment. And now here comes the marketing. We have to, pay for that. And then now we need employees, right? Because we all have full-time jobs. We can't be there. So now we're adding employees and headcount to the firm. And again, we're paying for all of this out of pocket. So now we have employees, we have a website, we have the legal framework set up, we have all these things. And like you mentioned, now it's insurance, right? Because we're not going to ask people from the community to pay us out of pocket, right? Like we have to have the insurance set up to sort of support how the people are going to pay. So that's an entirely different journey, right? So we take the lawyer's advice, and we sort of figure out like how to get a network with the insurances, and we're still like on the tail end of that, right? And we've been open since August, and we're still navigating the complexity of figuring out the insurances, but we're getting there. But all self-funded, and we're figuring it out as we go.
So yeah, my mind is kind of blown. Actually, it's just having been a business owner, I know what it takes. So it's impressive that you all have been able to do this and just the renovation and the equipment and everything it takes. Bootstrapping for an organization or a company that requires that many different elements is very different than bootstrapping, say, just a digital business or something where, all you need is sort of your mind and a computer as well. So, how have you managed this from a time perspective? Also, having a full time job and a job that is heavily regulated and under a lot of scrutiny. That's not a set it and forget it kind of profession.
It is extremely difficult, extremely difficult. I basically have a set schedule, right? Like, so I'm working my career from 8 to about 7. Some days it goes to 8. Take an hour break, try to eat, go to the gym, and then the next 3 hours of my night is strictly focused on the health center. And I try to stick to that schedule, but obviously some days, kind of shifts back and forth. Like sometimes I can spend more time in the health center or less time at work, but I have to kind of carve out that time to make sure I'm working on both businesses equally, or like proportionately, I should say. So having extreme time management skills and sort of setting boundaries, right? Because I still have friends, I have family, and all those things. So trying to balance that out is difficult, right? Because people just don't understand like how difficult this journey can be, especially when you're paying, you're self-funding a startup with so much overhead, right? Like people just don't understand. So setting boundaries, extreme precise time management, and faith in God to keep me going. So some days it gets heavy.
And looking to the community that you've chosen to serve, which is honorable. But let's be clear, going into um, someplace like East Orange is very different than going somewhere like Maplewood. Not far apart, but very different from a median income, the resources that are available to them, that kind of population. So, how do you balance? And of course, there's insurance payments and all of that, but how do you balance? Obviously, a desire to make something profitable, but also serve a community that has been neglected in so many ways. How do you really reconcile the two as an activist, but also a for-profit business owner?
I think it's really honestly, it's just having um keeping my principles in mind, and my partners keeping our principles in mind, because like you said, right, we could easily go to a different neighborhood and make tons of profit, right, and be much easier. Um, but I think for us, it's more about building institutions to support people that are underserved, right? Because we come from those neighborhoods, right? Like I'm from Harlem, my partner's from Queens, and my other partner is an immigrant. So we're like, yeah, we can make a lot of money if we're in this other neighborhood, but our purpose is much bigger here. It's not just about money, because all of us are well off, right? Like I'm a vice president, my partners are occupational therapists, and they're at the top of their fields. Like money is not the motivation for us. It's more about building legacy in an institution and making a positive impact. Especially after having those conversations with parents that want to have support for their children, because the area that we in is very it's there are a lot of autistic children and families there, so there's a lot of support that is required, and being able to provide that for them conveniently, and they don't have to travel 30 or 40 minutes to go to the next town. Like there's purpose in that, and that's more important than money for us.
Absolutely. So getting the doors open, you've got the equipment in, you've now gotten the staff. How did you get clientele through the door? Or
That
patients, I should say.
it was really tough, and I mean we're still thinking through that. But so we wanted to have an open house, just to let people know that we're here, and we had an event set up to have people come in and meet us and walk around and stuff like that. So we had flyers, and we were just walking around the community, knocking on doors, handing out flyers, and my partner, he like by the grace of God, just walks into this woman, and she is the CEO of a huge nonprofit um, that sort of caters to that autistic community that I mentioned. And, we start to build a relationship with her. And she's like, wow, you guys are like across the street. And, she's, thinking the same thing that I just mentioned to you. Like, this is perfect because there's nothing like this in this area, and the support is needed. So we built an amazing relationship with her. And, now we're starting to partner with her in events and meeting parents and talking to children and stuff like that. And then word of mouth spreads. Like if things are good, things kind of spread word of mouth. So that's been like how we've been getting patients so far, but now we're trying to shift to like doing our own marketing, um, you know focusing on ads, and doing things for the newspaper and stuff like that. But like we're still like in the beginning of that journey.
Do you have concerns about how East Orange may change the way the other oranges have changed?
Yes and no. I lived in East Orange for 2 years. So I saw like, the development happening. I can see investors coming in and things like that. Um, but it's not consistent enough to where I think the makeup of the community is going to change. That may happen, but no time soon. Maybe it'll probably take a decade for that community to turn around, because it's honestly so bad. Um, but yeah, I can see the investors coming in, but I don't think the community is going to change that much.
So, like looking at the way that you've gone about this with your partners, it takes a certain kind of temperament to bootstrap in this way at this level. And I think what stops a lot of folks, particularly people who look like us, from taking the big leap is feeling like if I don't have all the money in my account to do this today, and if I don't have the money for contingency plans and unexpected expenses, like I can't get started, I'm not going to do this. And that for most people never happens, right? Or it happens at age 55 when you've been in your career for 30 plus years. So how do you manage the stress and the anxiety around this idea of literally getting paid over here and then investing into this major enterprise over there?
It's sort of an out of body experience, honestly. It's more so of keeping my head in the future, knowing that sooner or later, I won't have to self fund, and just really staying laser focused on that goal. Because if you try to like live in the present with that, it's really really tough. Because again, I live in my basement, so because I have to focus on my goal, right? I'm sacrificing for the bigger goal. And there are times where like, there are issues that come with living in a basement. I'm just like, man, like, I could be living, in a very nicer environment, but eyes on the prize, and just having that mindset gets me through. I know one day that it's going to pay off, and knowing how much it's impacting other people in a positive way, I'm able to make the sacrifice.
And we all know that when we're talking about this space within healthcare, be it urgent care, physical therapy, occupational therapy, lots of people build these types of businesses to get bought out by a conglomerate, right? It is a focus and a target for investment groups now um, within the healthcare industry. Do you feel like this is like a FUBU situation? Like we want to hold this and own it forever, or is there a possibility for a different play down the line?
Yeah, so I've had these conversations with my partners, more than once, right? Because it ultimately, we want to stay in control,
Right.
right? And again, we're all from humble beginnings, so the idea of getting $100 million buyout or $50 million buyout is an amazing opportunity, right? And that could benefit our families for years to come. But I think we're somewhere in the middle, right? Like we want to be able to, have some more infrastructure and some more finances and capital sort of come through the door so that we can do more, and sort of take a step back, right? Because, we all have full time jobs, we have responsibilities, and going through this period is tough. And eventually we're going to want to take a break, right? And in order to do that, we kind of have to have the finances to do that. So, I think at some point we would entertain some sort of buyout, but we want to remain in control. Maybe we sell 30% or 40%, but we want to remain in complete control of the company forever. I don't think we'd ever sell completely.
And thinking about that, the investment that you're doing and playing the long game, I want to talk about that in relation to kind of how that plays out with personal goals as well. Because oftentimes, people, when you've reached VP status and you've gotten to a certain point of your career, what does everyone assume? Like you're balling, right? Like you've got the money, you've got the flat car, the nice house, and you may own real estate like you do, but make the sacrifice in the way that you have for the long term. But do you feel pressure, particularly because you've been raised by, these two strong women, that like I'm investing in the long game, but that may mean I can't take care of my family in the way that I aspire to, or it may mean that being a husband and father is going to be farther down the line. Are you having these internal conversations with yourself, and how do you reconcile that if so?
Absolutely every single day. Every single day. And I mean, for full disclosure, I'm 33, and having a family and a child is an aspiration for me. So, eventually I have to figure something out. But I think it's a matter of being transparent and sort of being able to deal with people being disappointed in me, honestly, right? Because everyone has their like expectations of me because they think, I have all this available capital when in reality, you know, my money is tied up at the moment. And so people don't understand that. They don't understand that. And I think it's just being able to deal with, people being disappointed or feeling like, or being upset that I'm not being or providing for them in the way that they think that I should, because I know down the line there will be a time, when I can do that. So I think that's one part of it. The other part of it is just, knowing that my heart is in the right place, right? It'd be one thing if I actually had or was living the life that they think that I'm living and not doing, what I should be or to support them. But I'm not, right? So I know that my heart is in the right place, but, you know, it weighs definitely every day, but got to keep one foot in front of the other and keep walking. So that's what I've been doing.
And I think that that's pressure and like a dialogue that Black and brown folks experience that you don't hear from our white counterparts. It's just an added layer of complexity to the choices that you make for your life, thinking about and having concern for how do you give back and take care of other people. Like I've never heard one of my white friends bring that up. It's more so them being like, I'm trying to figure out when I get like the next part of my trust, or if my dad will give me money for this because he wants to save on taxes, so he's trying to move some money over here to me. Like it's just a very different dynamic, and quite frankly, can be an added layer of stress.
Yeah, and honestly, like they just don't have those problems, right?
Mhm.
Like they come from wealth. The socioeconomics between our groups are just different, right? So they
Right.
don't have those kinds of challenges, and that's why we are making the sacrifices that we're making, because we want to change that, right? Like I don't want that to be a problem for my kids or my grandkids. And so I think everyone has to sacrifice to get further in the long run. And, some people are going to understand that and some people won't. But, if I feel in my heart that I'm doing the right thing to benefit everyone, that's just the path that I chose.
Hmm. And as you've been on this path and evolution as a man, and as a professional, and now an entrepreneur, have you thought back to the absence of your father and explored that any further?
Yes. So I have to be careful with my words here, but I think the absence of my dad has sort of shown up in my love life,
Mm,
right? Because I didn't know what it was like to see, a man like love a woman, how he treats a woman and stuff like that. So, I kind of have this internal battle about the kind of man that I want to be and how I should be doing things. And, just looking at my past, how I've hurt certain women, based on decisions I've made because I didn't have like the right guidance or the right idea about what a man should be. So, certainly missing the absence of my dad in that aspect. But thankfully, I have a great, 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 great circle of friends. I mean, amazing guys, and honestly, I look to them. Right, these are people that know me really well, and we're sort of like on the same path. We're kind of like the same people, so I look to them. A lot of them are married, they have families and kids, and and they're doing a great job. So that absence, while that absence is there, I have an outlet to sort of fill that void a little bit.
awesome. Now shifting gears a little bit, describe a time when you had to be extraordinary on an ordinary day.
Uh, that's a good question. I think that in my present day, I have to be extraordinary every day. I recently ascended to this new role where there is a ton of responsibility, and that responsibility is continuing to grow, and the expectations of me are continuing to grow. And while I want to do well for myself, I also want to be an example and be able to um, be a light for other people coming behind me. So there's an intense amount of stress and pressure that comes with that. And then, on the other side of that coin, I'm also an entrepreneur. So, after going through a day of, working in finance for 9, 10 hours, I have another 4 hours left to focus on and focus and problem solve and figure out how to build this infrastructure for an institution to support the community. And that goes until 10, 11 p.m. And then to add to that, I'm a landlord, so going through all that, and then I get the phone call that the toilet isn't working. I kind of have to do that too, and then I have to juggle all those things and still live life, right? Support my family and my friends and stuff like that. So I think, just having that sort of weight and responsibility to carry sort of forces me to be extraordinary every day.
And without consideration for who might actually hear this from your current company, in a perfect world, if and when do you get to jump into entrepreneurship full time?
That is something I've been wrestling with because I want to finish my career. I want to go C-level, and that's the next step, and that might be another 5, 10 year journey. But I think when it's all said and done, I will hit the stop, or I have a hard stop at 45. So wherever I am in my professional career, I think at that point it will be time to fully focus on entrepreneurship.
Listen, well, I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. And you're one of the few people who've been on the show and who've had the ability to really condense their story into a solid hour. Most folks cannot do that. But thanks so much for joining us. But tell people where they can find out more about you as well as the Health Center online.
uh, SereneHealthCenter.com, Serene Health Center on Instagram. My handle on Instagram is t.mcd and 3 underscores on Instagram. Also on Facebook as Tarik McDermott. Yeah, pretty much it.
Well, I am thoroughly excited to see what you do, particularly in a community that needs it, and requires and should have access to quality care. I couldn't be more proud of what you're building, and I'm excited to see how it evolves. And something tells me that Serene Health Center, this location, is not the last.
I hope not. I hope not. That's definitely the goal. And thanks for having me. It was really good talking with you.
Thanks for being here. To our listeners, listen, if you've enjoyed this episode, like, share, subscribe, comment, tell a few friends about it. Also, if you are a New Jersey resident, please check out Serene Health Center and the work that they're doing there. If there are ways that you can support, or if you're looking to receive care, please do that. We support our own around here. And if nothing else, please remember to be extraordinary on an ordinary day. Take care.